My blood turned to ice as Silas Thorne, a man worth billions on paper, sneered the words street garbage across the silent dinner table. 20 guests in designer tuxedos watched my humiliation with bated breath. I did not cry. I did not scream. I simply tapped the send button on my phone under the table. I rose slowly, leaned into his ear, and whispered, "Enjoy the meal, Silas, because I just bought your company's debt and fired you. I am Sienna, 32 years old, and that moment was the culmination of a war they did not even know they were fighting. Before I tell you how I took down an empire with a single signature, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by people who thought they were better than you. Now let us go back to where the nightmare began earlier that evening. I pulled my rusted 2004 Honda Civic into the driveway of the Thorne estate. The brakes squealed loudly, a sharp contrast to the silent purr of the Bentleys and Porsches lining the paver stones. I could feel the eyes of the valet staff burning into me. They looked at my car with disdain, but I did not care. This beat-up car was my filter. It was the only way to know if people loved me, or for the 8-figure portfolio I managed under a shell company. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My hair was pulled back in a tight professional bun, and my makeup was minimal. I looked nothing like the women Dante usually brought home, and that was exactly the point. I reached into the passenger seat and grabbed a bottle of wine wrapped in plain brown paper. To the untrained eye, it looked like something from a corner store. In reality, it was a 1982 Chateau Margaux worth more than the dress the woman answering the door was wearing. I took a deep breath. Tonight was important. It was the first time I would meet Dante's entire family, including his terrifying father, Silas, and his sister-in-law, Tiffany. Dante had warned me they were traditional. He did not tell me they were cruel. I rang the doorbell. It played a melody that sounded pretentious and long. A moment later, the heavy oak door swung open. Standing there was Tiffany. She was a vision of icy blonde perfection, wearing a silver gown that hugged her frame. Her eyes scanned me up and down, lingering on my simple off-the-rack navy dress and my scuffed heels. She did not smile. She did not say hello. Instead, she turned her head slightly back toward the kitchen and shouted, "Martha, the new maid is here early." And she parked her junk car in the guest driveway. "Make her move it before the senator arrives." She turned back to me, holding out a coat check tag. "Here, take the coats to the back room and then start passing the hors d'oeuvres. And try not to look so lost. We need professionals tonight, not charity cases." I handed my coat to the closet attendant, deliberately ignoring Tiffany's command to serve food. I smoothed the front of my dress, straightened my spine, and walked into the main salon. It was a cavernous room filled with mahogany furniture and the heavy scent of expensive cigars and old money. Dante was standing near the fireplace looking nervous. He looked relieved to see me, but he did not cross the room to greet me. That should have been my first warning. He waited for me to navigate the sea of judgmental stares alone until I reached his side. "Come meet my father," Dante whispered, his hand trembling slightly as he guided me toward a man sitting in a high-backed leather chair like it was a throne. Silas Thorne did not stand up. He was a large man with graying hair and eyes that assessed value instantly. He was holding court, surrounded by sycophants laughing too hard at his jokes. "Father, this is Sienna," Dante said, his voice cracking slightly. I extended my hand professionally. "Mr. Thorne, it is a pleasure to finally meet you. Dante speaks of you often." Silas looked at my hand, then at my face, and then deliberately picked up his scotch glass instead. He did not touch me. The rejection was so sharp and public that the conversation in the immediate vicinity died down. He took a slow sip of his drink before speaking. "So this is the girl," Silas rumbled, his voice deep and dismissive. "Dante tells me you are in business. What is it you do exactly?" I kept my hand extended for a second longer than necessary before calmly retracting it. I refused to let him see me flinch. "I work in corporate restructuring and distress management." I said clearly, my voice steady. I specialize in acquiring underperforming assets. A silence fell over the nearby guests. Silas stared at me for a heartbeat, and then let out a dry, barking laugh that echoed off the high ceilings. Consultant. That is a fancy word for unemployed these days. Or do you mean you sell life insurance door to door in the projects? I know your type. You give yourself a fancy title to hide the fact that you are living paycheck to paycheck. My jaw tightened, but I kept my expression neutral. Actually, I help failing companies avoid bankruptcy by identifying toxic leadership, I replied, holding his gaze. Silas's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, a man in a flashy velvet blazer stepped forward, interrupting us. It was Julian, Dante's older brother and the supposed heir to the empire. He wrapped an arm around Silas's shoulder, exuding the confidence of a man who had never been told no. "Don't bore us with small potatoes, Pop," Julian said loud enough for the whole room to hear. "I just got off the phone with the Tokyo investors. The logistics deal is locked in. 20 million straight cash injection by next quarter. Thorn Logistics is going global." The room erupted in polite applause. Silas beamed at Julian, the pride radiating off him in waves. "That is my boy Silas," roared, clapping Julian on the back. "That is how you do business. Real business, not consulting." I fought the urge to roll my eyes. I knew for a fact that the Tokyo deal had fallen through 3 weeks ago because Thorn Logistics failed the due diligence audit. Julian was lying to his father's face, and Silas was too blinded by arrogance to see it. Dante shrank into the background, his hand slipping from my waist. I looked at the man I thought I loved. He was invisible in this house, and by bringing me here, he had made me a target to distract them from his own inadequacies. I was alone in a room full of wolves, but they did not realize I was the hunter. Dinner was announced by a butler in white gloves, cutting the tension in the living room, but replacing it with a sense of impending doom. We migrated to the dining hall, a space that resembled a museum more than a home. A 20-foot table made of imported mahogany dominated the room, set with enough silverware to confuse a diplomat. Silas sat at the head of the table naturally. Dante was ushered to his right, and I was pointed toward a chair at the very far end near the kitchen door. It was a calculated move to separate us, isolating me from the only ally I supposedly had. I sat down quietly, placing my napkin in my lap. The air was thick with the clinking of crystal and hushed conversations that stopped abruptly whenever I looked up. Tiffany, who had seated herself strategically to my left, seemed restless. She was not interested in eating. She was interested in hunting. As the servers began pouring the wine, Tiffany waved them away from my glass. "Let me handle our guest," she said, her voice sugary sweet. She grabbed the decanter of heavy red wine. I knew exactly what was coming, but I did not move. I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. She leaned over, feigning a loss of balance, and the decanter tipped aggressively. A dark crimson wave cascaded over my shoulder, soaking into the white fabric of my dress and pooling in my lap. Gasps echoed around the table. Tiffany brought a hand to her mouth in a performance that would not have made the cut in a high school play. "Oh my God," she exclaimed, her eyes gleaming with malice. "I am so clumsy. I am so sorry, Sienna, but honestly, it is probably for the best. That dress looked a little tired. I am sure it was a great find at whatever thrift store you frequent, but you know how cheap fabric holds odors. Just toss it in the trash where it belongs." Silas chuckled from the head of the table, stabbing a piece of steak. "Do not worry about it, Tiffany. Accidents happen when you are not used to fine dining etiquette." I slowly picked up my linen napkin and dabbed at the spill. The wine was cold against my skin, but my blood was boiling. I took a breath, inhaling the aroma rising from my ruined dress. I turned to Tiffany, who was waiting for me to cry or run away. I did neither. "Actually, Tiffany," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the silent room, "you do not need to worry about the dress. This is a 2015 Cabernet Sauvignon, judging by the heavy notes of black currant and the high tannin structure." The acidity is aggressive, yes, but this dress is 100% Italian silk, crepe de chine, not synthetic polyester like the gown you are wearing. Silk releases tannins quite easily with the right enzymatic cleaner. If I were wearing a knockoff blend like yours, I would be worried, but quality always survives a little mess. The silence that followed was deafening. Tiffany's face turned a shade of red that matched the wine on my chest. She looked down at her own shimmering silver dress, her insecurity exposed. I had just called out her fake designer wear in front of the entire elite circle. I saw Dante's jaw drop, and for a split second a flash of confusion crossed Silas's face. They expected me to be ignorant. They expected me to be grateful for scraps. Instead, I had just critiqued their wine list and their wardrobe in one breath. I dropped the stained napkin onto the table with a soft thud. Now, if you will excuse me, I believe the main course is served. My polite request for dinner was met with a violence that made the crystal chandelier above us tremble. Silas slammed his heavy fist onto the mahogany table, causing the silverware to jump and the wine glasses to rattle ominously. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the cavernous room, silencing even the kitchen staff who were peeking through the swinging doors. His face was a mask of purple rage veins bulging in his neck as he stood up, towering over the table. Enough of this charade, Silas roared, his voice shaking the walls. He reached beneath his chair and produced a thick manila envelope. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it across the long table. It slid over the polished wood, knocking over a salt shaker, before coming to a stop directly in front of my salad plate. Glossy photographs spilled out, fanning across the white tablecloth like a losing hand of poker. I looked down without blinking. They were grainy surveillance shots. One was of the crumbling apartment complex in the Bronx where I spent my first 5 years. Another was a mugshot of my biological father from 2 decades ago. The last one was a picture of me at 16, wearing an oversized hoodie outside a foster care group home. Did you think I would let Dante bring a stray dog into this house without checking for fleas first? Silas spat, pointing a thick finger at the photos. I know exactly what you are, Sienna. You are a rat from the Bronx projects. Your father was a junkie, and your mother was a thief who died in prison. You have no lineage, you have no history, and you certainly have no money. He looked around the table, making eye contact with his wealthy guests to ensure they were witnessing my destruction. She is a fraud, he announced, his voice dripping with venom. She latched onto my son because she smells money. She is nothing but a corporate parasite trying to marry into a legacy she could never earn. I remained seated, my hands folded calmly in my lap, even as my heart hammered against my ribs. I did not feel shame for my past. I survived it. But Silas was using my survival as a weapon to strip me of my dignity. He leaned forward, placing both hands on the table, his face inches from the centerpiece. You thought you could come in here with your thrift store dress and your memorized wine facts and fool us, he hissed. But you cannot scrub the gutter off your skin. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Silas straightened up, adjusting his suit jacket with a look of finality. Get out of my house, he commanded, pointing to the door. I will not have my dinner ruined by the stench of street garbage. The insult hung in the air, ugly and raw. Street garbage. He had reduced my entire existence, my education, my career, and my humanity down to 2 words. I looked at the photos one last time, then slowly lifted my gaze to meet his. He expected tears. He expected begging. Instead, I stood up with the grace of a queen, pushing my chair back without making a sound. I turned to the man who had whispered promises of forever into my ear just last night. Dante, I said softly. My voice was the only steady thing in the room. Are you going to let him speak to me like that? I waited for him to stand up. I waited for the anger I knew he felt toward his father to finally surface. But as Silas glared at him, Dante simply crumbled. He did not look at me. He looked at the tablecloth, his knuckles white as he gripped his fork. Please, Sienna. He mumbled, his voice so quiet it was almost lost. Just go. Do not make a scene. You know how he is. That was the moment my heart did not just break, it calcified. He was not a victim of his father. He was an accomplice. Silas let out a triumphant grunt. See, the boy has some sense left after all. Security. Escort this trash to the curb. Two large men in dark suits materialized behind me. One reached for my arm, his grip unnecessarily tight. Do not touch me, I snapped, pulling my arm away with enough force to make him step back. I can walk. I looked at Dante one last time, memorizing the cowardice etched into his handsome features. You chose your side, Dante, I said. I hope the inheritance is worth your soul. I walked out of the dining room, the sound of silverware scraping against china resuming before I even reached the hallway. They went right back to eating as if I had never existed, as if I were nothing more than a minor disturbance in their perfect, wealthy lives. The heavy front door slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing into the night. The air outside was biting cold, but I did not feel it. The adrenaline flooding my system was hot enough to burn down the entire estate. I walked to my rusted Honda, the valet watching me with a smirk as he tossed my keys into the gravel instead of handing them to me. I bent down, picked them up, and unlocked my car. But I did not start the engine immediately. I sat in the driver's seat, the leather cracked and worn beneath me, and pulled out my secure phone. My hand was perfectly steady as I dialed a number that very few people in New York had access to. It rang once. Yes, ma'am, a crisp voice answered. It was Marcus, my head of acquisitions at Phoenix Capital. It is late. Is everything all right? Everything is perfect, Marcus, I said, staring up at the lighted windows of the Thorne mansion, where they were currently laughing at my expense. Initiate Project Phoenix immediately. I want to buy the entire debt portfolio of Thorne Logistics. Every loan, every lien, every overdue credit line. I do not care what the premium is. Buy it all. There was a pause on the other end, followed by the sound of rapid typing. Ma'am, that is a highly distressed asset. The risk exposure is massive. Are you sure? I watched the silhouette of Silas Thorne move past the window. I am absolutely sure, I replied. By tomorrow morning, I want to own the air they breathe. Execute it. The morning sun hitting the glass facade of the Phoenix Capital headquarters felt different than the cold air of the Thorne estate. I stepped out of the elevator on the 45th floor, the heels of my Louboutins clicking a sharp, authoritative rhythm against the marble floor. This was my kingdom. Here I was not a charity case or a stray dog. I was the apex predator. The open plan office was already buzzing with activity. Analysts in bespoke suits were glued to their monitors tracking global markets. As I walked down the main corridor, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations stopped. Postures straightened. Good morning, Chairwoman, the receptionist said, standing up so quickly her chair rolled back. I gave her a curt nod, not breaking my stride. I pushed open the double-frosted glass doors to my corner office, where the skyline of Manhattan served as my wallpaper. Marcus was already there, standing by my desk with a thick stack of documents. He looked like he hadn't slept, but the adrenaline in his eyes matched mine. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. The bank was desperate to sell, he said, tapping the leather binder. They have been trying to offload the Thorne Logistics debt for months. Silas has been missing interest payments since the last quarter. The bank officers were terrified of a public default, so when we offered to buy the debt at face value, they practically threw the papers at us. I walked around my desk and sat in my chair, the leather cool against my back. I looked at the document in front of me. It was a transfer of rights for a $12 million commercial loan. To Silas, $12 million was a number he probably boasted about spending on yachts. But in reality, it was the rope around his neck. I picked up my fountain pen. My hand did not shake. I signed my name in black ink, the loops and curves sharp and decisive. With that motion, the $12 million left my account, and the ownership of Silas Thorne's financial soul transferred to me. I capped the pen and looked up at Marcus. How bad is it really? I asked. I want the autopsy report before the body is even cold. Marcus connected his tablet to the large wall monitor. A complex web of red charts and declining graphs appeared. It is worse than we thought, he explained, pointing to a sharp drop in the liquidity index. Thorn Logistics is in technical default. They have zero cash flow. Silas has been cannibalizing the company's assets to maintain his lifestyle and pay for those lavish parties. The company is Hollow Sienna. It is a zombie corporation. It is only alive because vendors and smaller banks believe the Thorn name still means something. They are trading on a reputation that has been bankrupt for years. I swiveled my chair to look out at the city. Silas had called me a fraud. He had called me a parasite. Yet here he was living a lie wrapped in velvet, while I had built a fortress of real steel and cold, hard cash. He was playing a game of smoke and mirrors, unaware that I had just smashed the glass. Freeze their credit lines, I said softly to the window. Send the notification to their CFO that Phoenix Capital is now their primary lender. And Marcus, make sure the courier delivers the notice during lunch. I want Silas to choke on his appetizers. While I was busy signing checks that would eventually dismantle his legacy, Silas was sitting in his office trying to destroy my livelihood. He was a man who believed that power was a blunt instrument, and he intended to use it to bludgeon me into submission. At 10 o'clock that morning, while his company's credit rating was silently plummeting into junk status, Silas decided to make a phone call that he thought would be the final nail in my coffin. I know this because the call was recorded on the other end. Silas sat in his leather chair nursing a hangover from the party and a bruised ego that was far more painful. He pulled out the thin dossier his private investigator had compiled on me. It was a masterpiece of misinformation that I had planted myself years ago. In it, there was a reference to a commercial building in Midtown, where I was listed as an administrative associate. To Silas, this confirmed I was a secretary. To anyone who knew how to read a property deed, it meant something entirely different. He dialed the main line of the building, putting the phone on speaker so Julian could witness his brutality. When the building manager answered, Silas did not bother with pleasantries. "This is Silas Thorn," he barked, his voice echoing in his empty office. "You have a girl working in your building named Sienna. She claims to be a consultant. I am calling to inform you that she is a fraud and a thief. If you want to maintain any relationship with Thorn Logistics, you will terminate her contract immediately." There was a long pause on the other line. The building manager, a man named Mr. Henderson, who had worked for me for 5 years, sounded confused but professional. "Mr. Thorn, I am looking at our directory now," Henderson said calmly. "We do not have an employee named Sienna." Silas's face turned red. "Do not lie to me," he snapped. "I have her file right here. It says she operates out of the penthouse suite on the 40th floor. She is probably the receptionist or some low-level assistant. Fire her or I will pull my business from your tenants." The silence on the other end stretched for a few seconds before Henderson spoke again, his voice carefully neutral. "Sir, I think there is a misunderstanding. The 40th floor is not a rental space. It is the private residence and office of the building's owner. The only person who operates out of that suite is the landlord." Silas blinked, looking at the phone as if it had spoken a foreign language. He looked at Julian and then let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. The owner, Silas mocked, shaking his head. "You are telling me the girl who drove a rusted Honda to my house last night owns a 40-story skyscraper in Midtown. Do you take me for a fool?" "Mr." Henderson attempted to correct him. "Mr. Thorn, the deed is under a trust, but the beneficiary is indeed Miss Sienna." Silas slammed his hand on the desk, cutting him off. "Listen to me, you incompetent bureaucrat. She is a con artist. She probably broke into that office to take photos for her Instagram. She does not own anything more valuable than the shoes on her feet. If you are too stupid to see that, then you deserve to be conned." He hung up the phone with a violent slam, looking at Julian with a smug expression. "Can you believe the lies she spins?" Silas said, adjusting his tie. "She has even the building staff fooled. But do not worry, Julian. Lies always crumble when you apply enough pressure." He was right about one thing: lies do crumble. He just did not realize that the lie was his entire life, and I was the pressure. He dismissed the information as a joke, completely ignoring the massive red flag waving in his face. He was so blinded by his prejudice that he could not conceive of a world where the girl from the Bronx looked down on him from a skyscraper. That arrogance was going to be his undoing. Here is the next part of the script based on your outline. Scene 8: Tiffany and social media. Tiffany sat poolside at the exclusive Emerald Bay Country Club holding her phone like a weapon. She zoomed in on the photo she had taken the night before. It was a masterpiece of cruelty. In the frame, I looked small and defeated, the red wine stain on my chest, looking like a gunshot wound, while the Thorne family laughed in the background. With a manicured finger, she tapped out the caption: "When the street trash tries to blend in with the diamonds, some people just do not belong. Hashtag clean up aisle 3. Hashtag gold digger. Hashtag Thorne legacy." She hit post and watched with glee as the likes began to roll in. In my office, 40 stories above the city, my phone buzzed. It was an alert from my reputation management software. I unlocked the screen and saw the photo. It had been up for only 20 minutes, but the comments were already brutal. One user wrote, "She looks like she stole that dress." Another commented, "Finally, someone put her in her place." Tiffany was tagging her wealthy friends, creating an echo chamber of mockery. She wanted to shame me into hiding. She wanted me to disappear. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking softly. Most women would have cried. Most women would have frantically reported the post or pleaded with the poster to take it down. I was not most women. I did not type a reply. I did not block her. Instead, I swiped through Tiffany's feed. I scrolled past the selfies, the vacation photos, and the pictures of her brand new Mercedes. I stopped at a photo from last month. It was Tiffany holding a giant cardboard check for $50,000, allegedly raised for her private charity, the Tiffany Thorne Initiative for Underprivileged Youth. I zoomed in on the date of the check. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up the public tax records for nonprofit organizations. It took me less than 5 minutes to find what I was looking for. The Tiffany Thorne Initiative had reported $0 in charitable disbursements for the last 2 fiscal years. Yet she was constantly hosting galas and fundraisers. The math did not add up, but her lifestyle certainly did. I picked up my secure phone and dialed my forensic accountant, a woman named Elena, who could find a missing penny in a government budget. "Elena," I said, my voice calm and cold, "I am sending you a link to a 501c3 registered to Tiffany Thorne. I want you to audit every single transaction. I suspect she is funneling charitable donations to fund her wardrobe and her husband's crypto addiction." Elena typed furiously on the other end. "I am looking at the preliminary filing now," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "Sienna, this is sloppy. She lists consulting fees paid to a shell company that shares an address with her mother's house. This is wire fraud." I watched the likes on Tiffany's hate post climb to 500. Let her have her moment, I thought. Let her feel powerful. Because when the IRS knocks on her door, no amount of hashtags will save her. "I want full documentation by tomorrow," I ordered. "We are going to turn her charity gala into a crime scene." While Tiffany was busy destroying my reputation online, Dante was busy proving exactly why he did not deserve to be part of my future. At noon, my security alerts notified me that a black Porsche had pulled up to my old address in the Bronx. It was a crumbling brick building with a broken intercom system, the place I had lived in 5 years ago, before my first major buyout. I had kept the lease active simply as a mail drop to throw people off my trail, but I had not slept there in years. On the security feed, I watched Dante step out of his car. He looked terrified, clutching his designer lapels, as if the neighborhood itself might bite him. He checked his watch, looked around nervously at a group of teenagers playing basketball, and then hurried to the front door. He pressed the buzzer for apartment 4B repeatedly. There was no answer, obviously. I switched camera angles to the internal hallway feed. The superintendent, a grumpy man named Mr. Russo who knew my secret, opened his door. I could see him shouting at Dante, waving a wrench. I turned up the volume on my tablet. "She does not live here anymore," Mr. Russo yelled, his voice distorted by the cheap microphone. "She moved out months ago, cleared out everything. Now get that fancy car out of my fire lane before I have it towed." Dante looked stricken. He backed away, stumbling slightly. To him, this did not mean I had moved up. To him, it meant I had been evicted. It fit perfectly into his father's narrative that I was destitute and unstable. He retreated to the safety of his leather seats, locked the doors, and pulled out his phone. A moment later, my personal cell phone buzzed on my mahogany desk. I let it go to voicemail. I wanted to hear exactly what he had to say when he thought I was at rock bottom. The notification popped up. New voicemail from Dante. Duration 45 seconds. I pressed play, letting his voice fill my silent, air-conditioned office. "Hey, Sienna. It is me. Look, I went to your apartment, and the super said you were gone. I am really worried about you. Please do not tell me you are staying at a shelter or something." I took a sip of my sparkling water, staring at the city skyline. "Listen, about last night," he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You have to understand, Dad is under a lot of pressure with the merger. He did not mean to be so harsh, but you did kind of provoke him with the wine talk. He just wants to protect the family legacy. You know how it is. Anyway, I know things are tight for you right now. I just Venmo'd you $200. Buy yourself a new dress, okay? Maybe something a little more modest, so Tiffany does not get upset next time. I will talk to Dad when he calms down. Just lay low for a bit. Love you." The message ended. $200. He offered me $200 to replace a dress that cost more than his car payments, and he had the audacity to tell me to be modest to appease the woman who assaulted me. He was not apologizing. He was paying me to be quiet. He was paying me to stay in my place. I looked at the transaction notification on my screen. "Dante Thorne sent you $200. Beneath it was a pending transaction from my finance department. Wire transfer initiated $12,500,000 for acquisition of Thorne debt." I laughed, a cold, sharp sound. I opened the payment app and hit decline on his $200. I did not need his pocket change. I was about to own his entire inheritance. I deleted the voicemail and turned back to my monitor. It was time to tighten the noose. At exactly 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Silas Thorne was sitting in his corner office, staring out at the Manhattan skyline with a glass of scotch in his hand. He was feeling invincible. He had just successfully humiliated his son's girlfriend, reasserted his dominance over his family, and convinced himself that the rumors about his company's financial instability were nothing more than jealous whispers. He took a drag from an expensive Cuban cigar, exhaling a cloud of smoke that obscured the view of the city he believed he owned. 10 minutes later, the illusion shattered. His executive assistant, a nervous woman named Bethany, burst into the room without knocking. Behind her was a man in a sharp gray suit holding a red legal portfolio. Silas frowned, putting his cigar down. "Who let you in?" Silas barked. "I am in a meeting." The man in the gray suit did not flinch. He walked straight to the mahogany desk and dropped the red portfolio onto the polished surface. It landed with a heavy, ominous thud. "Mr. Thorne, I am serving you with a notice of debt acceleration and immediate demand for payment." The courier said, his voice void of emotion. "Your primary lender. First National sold your entire debt portfolio this morning. The new note holder, Phoenix Capital, has exercised their right to call in the overdue interest immediately." Silas stared at the man, his face flushing a deep crimson. "Get out," he growled. The courier turned and left. Silas snatched the portfolio and ripped it open. His eyes scanned the document, skipping over the legal jargon until he reached the bold numbers at the bottom. Notice of default. Immediate payment required $2 million. Deadline, close of business today. $2 million. Silas felt the blood drain from his face. He grabbed his desk phone and hammered the speed dial for his chief financial officer. "Werner, get in here," Silas screamed into the receiver. "Now!" Seconds later, Werner, a balding man with sweat already beading on his forehead, rushed in. Silas threw the document at him. Papers fluttered to the floor. "Who is Phoenix Capital?" Silas shouted, slamming his hand on the desk. "And why are they demanding $2 million that we do not have?" Werner picked up the papers, his hands shaking. "Sir, I tried to tell you. The bank has been threatening to sell our debt for months. Phoenix Capital is a distress fund. They buy bad debt and they play hardball. They do not care about your relationship with the bank president. They just want their money. Fix it," Silas demanded, loosening his tie as the room suddenly felt suffocating. "Call them. Tell them it is a mistake. Tell them the check is in the mail." Werner looked up, his face pale. "I already called the number on the letterhead, sir. They are not accepting verbal negotiations. They said if the wire transfer is not received by 5 o'clock, they will file a motion to freeze our operating accounts tomorrow morning." Silas sank back into his leather chair. For the first time in years, he felt the icy grip of genuine fear. He did not have $2 million in liquid cash. He had tied it all up in the mansion, the cars, and Julian's failed projects. "Find the money," Werner Silas whispered, his voice trembling with rage. "Drain the employee pension fund if you have to. Sell the warehouse in Queens. I do not care what you do. Just pay them." He did not know that the person tightening the noose around his neck was the same woman he had thrown out of his house less than 24 hours ago. He thought he was fighting a faceless corporation. He had no idea he was fighting me. While Silas was scrambling to locate $2 million to save his company, his golden boy Julian was busy digging the grave even deeper. My private investigator had been tailing Julian for 3 days, and the footage he captured that afternoon was pathetic. Julian was not meeting with Tokyo investors or logistics partners. He was standing in the service alley behind an exclusive cigar club in Chelsea, shaking like a leaf in the wind. He was facing a man who looked like he carved statues out of granite for a living. This was Nico, a mid-level enforcer for a very dangerous syndicate involved in high-stakes illegal gambling. Julian loosened his tie, his eyes darting around the alleyway nervously. The audio from the parabolic microphone was crystal clear. "I need more time," Nico Julian pleaded, his voice cracking. The market crashed. "You saw what happened to Bitcoin and those altcoins. I lost 50% of the portfolio overnight. I just need a week for the market to correct itself, and I will cash out." Nico did not look impressed. He took a step closer, invading Julian's personal space. "We do not care about the market, Julian. You borrowed $5 million on margin from us to play crypto genius. The margin call is today. We want the principal plus the vigorish." Julian wiped sweat from his upper lip. "I cannot liquidate right now. If I pull the money out, the accounts will show a deficit. My father uses those accounts for payroll." Nico laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "So you are telling me you stole from Daddy's company to play casino with digital coins? That is rich. Does the old man know you hollowed out his operating capital?" "He does not know," Julian hissed, lowering his voice. "Nobody knows. If he finds out, he will cut me off. I am the heir. I am supposed to take over next year. Listen, my wife is handling the books. She is moving some numbers around to hide the gap until the market bounces back. Just give us 48 hours. Nico grabbed Julian by the lapels of his $3,000 suit and shoved him against the brick wall. "You have 24 hours, Julian. If we do not see the cash, we are going to pay a visit to your father. And then we are going to pay a visit to that pretty wife of yours who is cooking the books." Nico released him and walked away, disappearing into the city shadows. Julian slid down the wall, hyperventilating. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Tiffany, pickup?" Julian screamed into the phone the second it connected. Nico cornered me. "They want the money. You have to transfer the charity funds now. I do not care if it is illegal. Empty the foundation account and wire it to the wallet address I gave you. If we do not pay them, they are going to kill me. And if Dad finds out we stole the operating cash for crypto, we are both on the street. Do it now." He hung up, burying his face in his hands. He thought he was alone in that alley. He had no idea that my investigator was recording every desperate word documenting the felony that would hand me the keys to his kingdom. Tiffany knew. She was not just a bystander, she was his accomplice. At 1:30 that afternoon, I walked into the lobby of Le Cuckoo, one of the hardest reservations to get in Manhattan. I was not there for pleasure. I was there to meet the CEO of a rival logistics firm who was interested in the assets I was currently stripping from Silas. I looked impeccable in a tailored cream power suit that cost more than my first car. The maitre d' nodded discreetly as I entered, but before I could reach the host stand, a shrill, familiar voice cut through the ambient jazz music. "Well, look who it is. I did not know they let the help use the front door." I stopped and turned slowly. Tiffany was standing near the entrance with three of her socialite friends. They were all wearing oversized sunglasses indoors and holding clutch purses that cost the same as a year of college tuition. Tiffany stepped forward, a cruel smirk plastered on her face. She looked me up and down, clearly confused by my expensive attire but too arrogant to process it. "Are you stalking me, Sienna?" she hissed, stepping into my personal space. "Because if you are here to beg Dante for money, he is not coming. Or maybe you are applying for a job as a dishwasher. That would be more your speed." Her friends giggled, covering their mouths with manicured hands. I checked my watch, bored. "Tiffany," I said calmly, "I am in the middle of a business day. I do not have time for your high school drama. Please move." I tried to step around her, but she blocked my path. "Oh no, you do not get to walk away from me," she snapped, raising her voice enough to attract attention. "I am going to have you escorted out. You clearly do not belong here. This is a 5-star establishment, not a soup kitchen." She turned to the maitre d', snapping her fingers at him like he was a dog. "Henri, get over here. This woman is harassing us. She is a vagrant who wandered in off the street. Remove her immediately." Henri, a man with impeccable posture and a memory for faces that rivaled a database, rushed over. He looked distressed, but not at me. He looked terrified on my behalf. He ignored Tiffany completely and bowed his head slightly toward me. "Ms. Sienna." "I am so terribly sorry for the disturbance," Henri said, his voice dripping with respect. "We have prepared the private VIP alcove for your meeting with Mr. Sterling as requested. The chef has prepared a special tasting menu for you today. Shall I escort you there now, so you are not bothered by the general public?" Tiffany's jaw dropped so low it nearly hit the floor. Her friends stopped laughing instantly. "Excuse me," Tiffany sputtered, her face flushing red. "We have been waiting for our table for 20 minutes. Why is she getting a private room? Do you know who I am?" "I am Mrs. Julian Thorne." Henri finally turned to her, his expression cold and professional. "I know exactly who you are, Mrs. Thorne. And I know who Miss Sienna is. She is one of our most valued investors. As for your table, I am afraid there is a delay in the main dining room. You are welcome to wait at the bar. It should be another 45 minutes. He turned his back on her before she could respond. "Right this way, Miss Sienna," he said, gesturing toward the velvet rope. I walked past Tiffany, whose face was a mask of shock and humiliation. I did not say a word. I simply offered her a small, pitying smile as the velvet rope was unhooked for me, separating the VIPs from the people who just pretended to be. As I disappeared into the private dining room, I heard Tiffany screaming at Henri, unaware that she was only making herself look exactly like the trash she accused me of being. Back in the sanctuary of my office, the city lights were just beginning to flicker on as the sun dipped below the Hudson River. The confrontation with Tiffany at the restaurant had been a delicious appetizer, but I was still hungry for the main course. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water and sat at my desk, the leather chair embracing me like armor. My computer monitor blinked with a notification from a secure server. It was a file from my private investigator, the subject line reading simply, "The Smoking Gun." I connected my noise-canceling headphones and clicked play. The audio quality was pristine, filtered to remove the background noise of the city traffic, leaving only the terrified, desperate voice of Julian Thorne. It was the recording from the alleyway, but my investigator had managed to capture more than just the conversation with the loan shark. He had kept recording after the enforcer left, catching Julian making a frantic phone call to his broker. I closed my eyes and listened as Julian dug his own grave. "You have to liquidate the employee pension fund." Julian's voice cracked through the speakers. "I do not care about the penalties. I need $5 million in cash by tomorrow morning. Just mark it as a high-risk investment loss in the ledger. My father never checks the individual line items on the retirement accounts. Just do it, or we are both dead." I paused the recording and leaned back, a cold smile touching my lips. This was not just mismanagement. This was not just incompetence. This was grand larceny. Julian was stealing the retirement savings of hundreds of loyal employees to cover his gambling debts. He was willing to destroy the lives of truck drivers and warehouse workers who had served his family for decades just to save his own skin. Silas Thorne prided himself on the company's reputation. He constantly bragged about how the Thorne family took care of their own. This recording proved that the legacy he defended so violently was rot and decay from the inside out. If this audio leaked to the press, the stock would not just dip, it would be delisted. If it went to the district attorney, Julian would be trading his Italian suits for an orange jumpsuit for the next 15 years. I looked at the waveform on the screen, the jagged lines representing the destruction of the Thorne dynasty. I had bought their debt to squeeze them financially, but this file gave me the power to bury them legally. I saved the file to 3 different encrypted cloud servers and then transferred a copy to a USB drive which I slipped into my purse. I picked up my phone and sent a text to my legal team. "Draft a criminal referral complaint for the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Labor. Do not file it yet, just have it ready to pull the trigger." I spun my chair around to face the window, watching the tiny cars moving far below. Silas thought he was fighting a creditor. He had no idea he was dealing with an executioner. I held the USB drive in my hand, feeling its weight. "This is the silver bullet," I whispered to the empty room, "and I am going to make sure it hits the heart." The digital clock on the wall of Silas Thorne's office read 4:45 p.m. The red numbers mocked him, counting down the minutes until his empire would be frozen by a court order. Silas stood by the window, his back to his trembling CFO Werner. He was staring at a framed black-and-white photograph on his desk. It was a picture of his father standing in front of the Queen's Distribution Center, the very first warehouse the Thorne family had ever built. It was the cornerstone of their legacy, a symbol of 70 years of dominance in the logistics industry. "Sell it," Silas whispered, his voice hoarse. Werner hesitated, holding the phone to his chest. "Sir, are you sure? That facility is the heart of the Northeast operations. It is fully paid off. It is the only unencumbered asset we have left with significant equity. If we sell this, we are cutting off a limb." Silas spun around, his eyes wild with panic. "Do you think I want to do this, Werner? Phoenix Capital demands $2 million in 15 minutes. If we do not wire that cash, they will seize everything. The yachts, the mansion, the company accounts. We will be destitute. Sell the damn building." Werner nodded grimly and spoke into the phone. "Accept the offer from the Blind Trust. Immediate wire transfer. Yes, we understand it is 40% below market value. Just send the funds." Silas sank into his chair, feeling a wave of nausea. He had just sold his father's legacy for pennies on the dollar to a faceless buyer just to keep the lights on for another week. He told himself it was necessary. He told himself he would buy it back once the market turned. He was lying to himself, and deep down he knew it. 3 minutes later, the intercom buzzed. "The funds have cleared," Sir Werner announced, looking defeated. "We have wired the $2 million interest payment to Phoenix Capital. We are safe for now." Silas closed his eyes, exhaling a breath he felt he had been holding for hours. He was safe. He had survived the attack. He poured himself a drink, his hands shaking so badly the crystal decanter rattled against the glass. He believed he had outsmarted the market. Across the city, in my office at the top of the skyline, my tablet pinged with a notification that tasted sweeter than the finest champagne. I picked it up and opened the attachment. It was a digital deed of sale for the Queen's Distribution Center. I ran my finger over the screen, tracing the location. I remembered this building. When I was dating Dante, he once drove me past it. He told me his grandfather built it with his bare hands. He told me it was the one thing the family would never sell. And now it belonged to me. I looked at the transaction details. I had purchased the building through a shell company called Retribution Holdings for $4 million. Then, as the owner of Phoenix Capital, I had immediately received $2 million of those dollars back as an interest payment from Silas. In essence, I had forced Silas to sell me his family's crown jewel at a discount, and then used his own desperation to pay myself back half the purchase price. I swiveled my chair toward the window, watching the sun set over the city. Silas thought he had bought himself time. In reality, he had just handed me the keys to his history. I picked up the phone and dialed my property manager. "Change the locks on the Queen's facility tonight," I ordered. "And take down the Thorn Logistics sign. I want it replaced with a banner that says 'Under New Management.' Send a photo of it to Silas's personal email. I want him to see exactly who owns his legacy now." The annual Starlight Gala was the Super Bowl of New York high society. It was the one night where the city's elite gathered to pretend they were charitable while drinking champagne that cost more than a Honda Civic. For the Thorne family, attendance was not optional. It was a survival tactic. Rumors about their financial instability were beginning to circulate in the lower currents of Wall Street, and Silas knew he had to put on a show of strength. He marched his family down the red carpet like soldiers. Silas wore a tuxedo that strained against his gut, smiling with the confidence of a man who hadn't just sold his father's legacy to pay a light bill. Tiffany was draped in diamonds that were likely leased, posing for the paparazzi and clinging to Julian's arm. Julian, however, looked like he was walking to the gallows. He was sweating profusely under the camera lights, his eyes darting around the crowd, as if expecting his loan shark to jump out from behind a flower arrangement. They reached the top of the grand staircase, turning to wave at the press one last time. That was when the flashbulbs shifted. The photographers stopped shouting Silas's name. A hush fell over the entrance, followed by a sudden chaotic explosion of camera shutters. A sleek, matte black Maybach had pulled up to the curb, stealing every ounce of oxygen in the atmosphere. The driver opened the door, and a leg extended, clad in a stiletto that looked like a weapon. I stepped out into the night air. I was not wearing the modest dress Dante had suggested I buy with his $200. I was wearing a custom-made backless gown of liquid gold chainmail that shimmered with every breath I took. It was a dress designed for war. I heard the collective gasp of the crowd, but I did not look at them. I turned back to the car and extended my hand. A man stepped out to join me. He was tall, silver-haired, and radiated the kind of power that Silas could only dream of. It was Elias Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Global, the largest competitor to Thorn Logistics, and the man Silas had spent 20 years trying to destroy. The color drained from Silas's face so fast he looked like a corpse. He stood frozen at the top of the stairs, watching his discarded street trash take the arm of his mortal enemy. Elias leaned in and whispered something to me, and I threw my head back and laughed, a genuine, joyful sound that carried up the stairs. We began our ascent. The crowd parted for us like the Red Sea. I saw Dante standing near the entrance, his mouth slightly open, looking between me and his father. He looked small. He looked insignificant. As we reached the top of the stairs, I paused directly in front of the Thorne family. Tiffany looked like she had swallowed a lemon. Silas looked like he was about to have a stroke. "Good evening, Silas," I said, my voice smooth as silk. "You remember Elias, don't you? We were just discussing the future of logistics in the Northeast. It is amazing how much the landscape changes when dead weight is cut loose." Silas opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. He was paralyzed by the sheer audacity of my existence. I tightened my grip on Elias's arm, flashed a dazzling smile at the cameras, and walked past them into the ballroom, leaving the Thorne family standing in my shadow where they belonged. The ladies' room at the Plaza Hotel was a sanctuary of marble and gold leaf, a stark contrast to the chaotic noise of the ballroom. I stood before the expansive mirror, reapplying my lipstick with a steady hand. The silence was heavy, broken only by the soft sound of jazz filtering in from the hallway. I checked my reflection. The gold chainmail dress fit like a second skin armor for the battlefield I had just stepped onto. I looked powerful. I looked dangerous. And that was exactly why Tiffany could not stay away. The heavy door swung open with enough force to bang against the marble stop. I did not flinch. I watched in the mirror as Tiffany stormed in, her chest heaving. She locked the door behind her, sealing us in. Her face was twisted in a mixture of rage and jealousy that distorted her features. She marched up to me, her heels clicking aggressively on the tile until she was standing just inches away. "You have some nerve showing your face here," Tiffany hissed, her voice trembling. "You think because you slept your way onto Elias Sterling's arm that you are suddenly one of us. You are nothing but a high-priced escort, Sienna. Everyone out there is laughing at you. They know you are just a prop Elias is using to annoy Silas." I capped my lipstick slowly, placing it back in my clutch with deliberate precision. I turned to face her, leaning back against the cold marble counter. "Are they laughing, Tiffany?" I asked, my voice calm and low. Because from where I stood, it looked like they were terrified. "And you look terrified too." Tiffany laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "Me? Terrified of you? Do not make me laugh. You are a broke little orphan playing dress-up. I could have security throw you out right now." I took a step forward, invading her personal space. The air between us crackled with tension. I let my eyes drift down to the handbag she was clutching so tightly. It was a Himalayan Birkin, one of the rarest bags in the world, made of Nile crocodile hide and dyed to resemble snow-capped mountains. It was worth more than most people earned in a decade. "That is a beautiful bag," I said softly. "Is that new?" Tiffany blinked, confused by the sudden shift in topic. She clutched the bag tighter, lifting her chin. "Yes. Julian bought it for me last week. Not that you would know quality if it hit you in the face." I smiled, but it did not reach my eyes. "It is exquisite. It retails for about $200,000 on the secondary market." I paused, letting the silence stretch. "That is interesting because my forensic accountant found a withdrawal for exactly $200,000 from the employee pension fund last Tuesday. And another withdrawal for $50,000 from your charity account the day before." Tiffany's face went slack. The color drained from her skin so fast she looked like a ghost. Her grip on the bag loosened, her knuckles turning white. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I leaned in closer, my lips inches from her ear. "I know about the embezzlement, Tiffany. I know about the crypto losses. I know about the fake charity. And I know you are cooking the books to hide Julian's theft. I have the bank records. I have the audio recordings." I pulled back to look her in the eye. "You are walking around with grand larceny on your arm. Did you really think no one would notice? The FBI has a very keen eye for accessories like that. I wonder if they will let you keep it in federal prison. I hear orange jumpsuits are very unflattering this season." Tiffany stumbled back, hitting the stall door. Her breath was coming in short, panicked gasps. She looked at the bag as if it were suddenly burning her skin. "You are lying," she stammered. "You cannot prove anything." I picked up my clutch and walked past her toward the door. "I do not have to prove anything to you, Tiffany. I just have to prove it to the jury. Enjoy the party. It might be your last one for a very long time." I unlocked the door and walked out, leaving her trembling in the silence of her own crimes. I emerged from the ladies' room, the heavy bass of the live orchestra vibrating through the floorboards. The air smelled of expensive perfume and desperation. My encounter with Tiffany had sharpened my senses, and I scanned the room for Elias. But before I could take 3 steps, a large shadow loomed over me. It was Silas Thorne. He was holding a Scotch glass that was nearly empty, his face flushed with a mixture of alcohol and suppressed rage. He did not look like a titan of industry anymore. He looked like a bully who had just realized his victim hit back. Silas blocked my path, standing uncomfortably close. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on my gold dress with undisguised contempt. "So this is your new hustle," Silas slurred slightly, gesturing toward Elias across the room. "I have to admit, I underestimated you, Sienna. I thought you were just a street rat looking for a free meal. I did not realize you were a high-end escort. How much is Elias paying you to wear that dress and humiliate me?" I stopped smoothing the fabric of my gown. I did not step back. I looked him dead in the eye, channeling every ounce of cold fury I possessed. "You think everything is for sale because you bought your way through life, Silas," I said, my voice steady enough to cut glass. "But unlike you, I do not need a sponsor. I am here as a peer." Silas let out a barking laugh that drew stares from nearby couples. "A peer? Do not make me vomit. You are a prop. Elias is using you to get under my skin because I beat him on the Midwest distribution deal 10 years ago. Once the party is over, he will toss you back to the gutter where I found you. You are just a rental Sienna." He took a sip of his drink, looking pleased with himself. He thought he had won the verbal spar. He thought he had put me back in my place. I took a step closer, lowering my voice, so only he could hear. "You seem very focused on my employment status, Silas," I whispered. "But if I were you, I would be much more concerned about your own. Specifically, the $5 million balloon payment on your fleet financing that matures next Monday." Silas froze. The glass stopped halfway to his mouth. "How do you know about that?" he demanded, his voice dropping. "That is confidential internal data." I smiled, a sharp, dangerous expression. "I know because Phoenix Capital owns that note now," I replied. "We bought it this morning along with your warehouse mortgage. And I should warn you, we do not offer extensions to high-risk borrowers. You have 48 hours to find $5 million, Silas. Or maybe you can ask Tiffany to sell some of her handbags. Oh wait, she bought those with stolen money too." I watched the color drain from his face for the second time that night. His arrogance cracked, revealing the terrified old man underneath. He opened his mouth to shout, to deny, to threaten, but I did not give him the chance. "Enjoy the champagne, Silas," I said, sidestepping him. "It tastes much better when you can actually afford it." I walked away, leaving him standing alone in the middle of the dance floor, clutching his empty glass like a lifeline that had already snapped. He watched me join Elias, his eyes wide with a dawning horror that he could not quite articulate. He was beginning to realize that the street garbage he had thrown out was about to bury him. I turned away from Silas, ready to lose myself in the crowd, but a hand clamped down on my elbow. It was not the gentle touch I remembered from our year of dating. It was possessive, desperate, and trembling with a pathetic sort of rage. I spun around to find Dante standing there, his face flushed and his eyes darting between me and Elias Sterling. He looked like a child who had lost a toy only to find another kid playing with it. "So this is your plan," Dante spat, his voice loud enough to cut through the nearby conversations. "I defend you to my father. I send you money because I think you are starving, and you turn around and sleep with his biggest enemy just to get back at us." Elias stepped forward, his expression darkening, but I held up a hand to stop him. This was not his fight. This was the final severance of a tie I should have cut months ago. I looked at Dante, really looked at him for the first time since the breakup. I did not see the sweet architect I had fallen for. I saw a weak, spineless man who was terrified of losing his allowance. "Keep your voice down, Dante," I said calmly. "You are embarrassing yourself." "I am embarrassing myself." Dante laughed, a hysterical sound that drew the attention of the entire circle of onlookers. "You are the one parading around half-naked in a dress that costs more than my car. Who paid for it, Sienna? Did you charge it to Elias's account? Or is this how you pay for your rent now?" by climbing into bed with billionaires. The accusation hung in the air, ugly and crude. The guests around us gasped, whispering behind their hands. Dante smirked, thinking he had shamed me. He thought he was exposing a gold digger. He had no idea he was insulting the woman who currently owned the mortgage on his apartment. I pulled my arm from his grip with a sharp jerk. I stepped closer to him, my heels making me equal to his height. "You think I am here because of a man?" I asked, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "That is your problem, Dante. You view the world through the lens of your father's checkbook. You cannot imagine a woman existing in this room without being someone's accessory, because you have never been anything but an accessory yourself." Dante recoiled as if I had slapped him. "You are just a climber, Sienna," he stammered, trying to regain his footing. "You are just trying to prove you are not trash. But you are. You are just trash wrapped in gold foil." I stared at him, feeling the last remnants of affection evaporate. There was no anger left, just a profound, icy disappointment. "I did not come here with Elias to hurt you, Dante," I said, making sure my voice carried to the people listening nearby. "I came here to discuss business. Real business. Something you would know nothing about since you have never earned a dollar you did not beg your father for. Keep your $200. You are going to need it when I am done with this family." I turned my back on him, signaling to Elias that we were leaving. Dante shouted something after me, a final desperate slur, but I did not stop. I walked away, leaving him standing in the center of the ballroom, a small, angry man shouting at a woman who had already outgrown him in every way that mattered. While Dante was shouting insults at my back, his brother Julian was hiding on the secluded north terrace of the ballroom. He was huddled in the shadows, frantically chain-smoking and checking his watch every 30 seconds. He was terrified that Nico and his enforcers were waiting for him in the parking lot. He was so focused on the physical threat outside the gates that he did not notice the digital guillotine hovering over his neck. I watched him from the other side of the glass doors. I took a sip of champagne, unlocked my secure phone, and pressed send. On the terrace, Julian's phone vibrated violently in his hand. He jumped, nearly dropping his cigarette. He looked at the screen. It was a message from an unknown number. Attached was a single audio file titled "Insurance Policy." Julian hesitated. His thumb hovered over the screen. Then curiosity and fear won out. He pressed play, holding the speaker up to his ear. Even from where I stood, I could see his knees buckle as the recording began. It was his own voice, clear and undeniable, confessing to the embezzlement of the employee pension fund and the massive crypto losses. I typed out the follow-up message while he was still paralyzed by the sound of his own crimes. "Transfer your 15% equity stake in Thorn Logistics to Retribution Holdings immediately. The purchase price is $50,000. If you do not sign the digital transfer within 10 minutes, this recording will be sent to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the FBI, and your father." Julian stared at the screen, his face a mask of pure horror. $50,000 for shares that were theoretically worth millions. It was robbery. It was extortion. But the alternative was federal prison and the wrath of Silas Thorne. He looked around wildly, trying to spot his tormentor in the crowd, but the terrace was empty. He was fighting a ghost. He did not know Retribution Holdings was me. He likely thought it was another arm of the gambling syndicate squeezing him dry. Desperation creates a unique kind of compliance. I saw him furiously typing on his phone, his fingers slipping on the glass screen because of the sweat. He was accessing the chaotic, unorganized digital ledger of the company. A moment later, a notification popped up on my screen. "Contract signed. Equity transfer pending." I smiled. Julian had just sold his birthright for the price of a mid-range sedan because he was too terrified to face the consequences of his actions. He thought he had just bought his freedom. He thought that by sacrificing his ownership, he could take the $50,000, pay off a fraction of his gambling debt, and hide the embezzlement forever. He collapsed onto a bench, wiping his face with a trembling hand, believing the nightmare was over. He had no idea that he had just handed the controlling vote of the company to the woman his family called trash. The noose was not loosening. I had just kicked the chair out from under him. By Monday morning, the headquarters of Thorn Logistics looked less like a corporate office and more like a crime scene. The silence of the weekend had been replaced by the deafening roar of chaos. At exactly 9 o'clock, the automated payroll system attempted to process 3,000 direct deposits for drivers, warehouse workers, and administrative staff. Every single transaction bounced. Inside the executive suite, the phones were ringing with a relentless, shrill urgency that grated on the nerves. Werner, the chief financial officer, stood in the doorway of Silas's office, his face pale and slick with sweat. He held a tablet that was flashing with critical alerts. "Sir, the operating accounts are frozen," Werner stammered, his voice trembling. "Phoenix Capital filed an emergency injunction at the courthouse this morning. They have locked down everything pending a solvency hearing. We cannot pay the drivers. We cannot even buy fuel for the fleet." Silas Thorne stood by the window looking down at the parking lot. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides. Below him, the empire he had spent 40 years building was grinding to a halt. The signature blue trucks, usually moving in a synchronized ballet of commerce, sat idle in rows. Drivers were gathering near the main gates, holding hastily painted signs. "No pay, no haul. It is a glitch," Silas roared, spinning around to face his terrified CFO. "Tell them it is a banking error. Tell them the system is down for maintenance. I do not care what you tell them, just get those trucks moving. We cannot lie to them anymore," Werner pleaded. "The union representatives are in the lobby. They are threatening a total walkout. If the trucks do not move by noon, we will breach our contracts with Amazon and Walmart. The penalties alone will bankrupt us." Silas grabbed a heavy crystal paperweight from his desk and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall, sending shards of glass raining down onto the carpet. "This is not a solvency issue," Silas screamed, his eyes bulging. "This is sabotage. It is a coordinated attack. Someone is pulling the strings. It is Elias Sterling. He is paying off the banks. He is inciting the unions. He wants to see me beg." He poured himself a drink, ignoring the fact that it was not even 10 in the morning. He paced the room like a caged animal fueled by paranoia and denial. He refused to believe that his own mismanagement and arrogance were the cause. In his mind, he was the victim of a grand conspiracy. "Call the mayor." Silas barked. "Call the police commissioner. Tell them I want those strikers removed from my property. Tell them illegal protesters are blocking commerce. I have donated millions to their campaigns. It is time they paid me back." Werner looked down at his shoes. "Sir, I already called the mayor's office. They are not taking our calls. And the police commissioner is currently at a press conference announcing an investigation into corporate malfeasance. We are on our own." Silas froze the glass halfway to his mouth. The silence in the room was heavier than the noise outside. For the first time, he realized that his money and his influence had evaporated. He was the captain of a sinking ship, screaming orders at the waves, completely unaware that the ocean did not care who he was. And miles away, watching the news feed of the strike on my monitor, I took a sip of coffee. He was blaming invisible enemies, never suspecting that the hostile force destroying him was simply the consequences of his own actions coming home to roost. While Silas was busy screaming at the union representatives in the lobby, a much quieter but far more deadly transaction was taking place 3 floors up. Julian had barricaded himself in his office, ignoring the frantic pounding on his door from his own secretary. He was not working on a solution for the strike. He was working on saving his own skin. On his computer screen, the audio file I had sent him was paused at the exact second he confessed to stealing the pension fund. Next to it was the digital contract I had prepared under the banner of Retribution Holdings. The terms were non-negotiable. He had to transfer his entire 15% equity stake in Thorn Logistics to my shell company. In exchange, the audio file would be deleted, and the anonymous tip to the FBI would be withdrawn. I watched the real-time surveillance feed from the hidden camera I had installed in his office smoke detector weeks ago. Julian looked like a man on the verge of a cardiac event. He had loosened his tie and his hands were shaking so violently he could barely hold his computer mouse. He looked at the family portrait on his desk, a picture of him and Silas shaking hands at his graduation. It was a symbol of the legacy he was expected to protect, but Julian had never been a protector. He was a parasite, and parasites always choose survival over loyalty. He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over the biometric authentication. I could see him mouthing the words, "I am sorry, Dad," over and over again, as if the apology would absolve him of the betrayal. But he did not put the phone down. He did not call the police. He did not confess to his father. Instead, he chose the coward's way out. He pressed his thumb against the screen. On my monitor, a green notification bar flashed across the top of the screen. Identity verified. Transfer initiated. Julian slumped back in his chair, tears streaming down his face. He thought he had just bought his freedom. He thought that by giving up his shares, he could take his secret to the grave and continue living his lavish lifestyle, perhaps moving to a non-extradition country with whatever cash he had left. He believed he was dealing with a nameless blackmailer who just wanted assets. He had no idea that his signature was the final key I needed. With Julian's 15% added to the debt equity swap I was about to execute, I would control 51% of the voting rights. Julian had not just sold his shares. He had sold his father, his sister-in-law, and the entire future of the Thorne family. I sat back in my chair sipping my coffee as the transfer confirmation popped up. Transaction complete. Ownership updated. I closed the laptop. The golden boy had fallen. He had proven exactly what I told Silas at that dinner table. The Thorne family was not built on honor or strength. It was built on greed and fear. And it took only one terrified little man to bring the whole house of cards crashing down. I picked up my phone and dialed my legal team. "The equity transfer is confirmed," I said calmly. "Proceed to the next phase. Call the emergency board meeting. It is time to introduce the new majority shareholder to the board." The family library, usually a place of quiet reflection, now felt like a bunker during an air raid. Silas Thorne paced back and forth in front of the unlit fireplace, his footsteps heavy and uneven. Tiffany sat on the leather sofa, chewing on a perfectly manicured nail, while Dante stared at the floor, looking like he wished he could dissolve into the expensive Persian rug. The silence was broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock, counting down the seconds until total bankruptcy. Silas stopped pacing and slammed his hand against the marble mantelpiece. "We are finished," he muttered, his voice devoid of its usual thunder. "The unions are not budging. The fuel suppliers have cut us off. And that vulture Elias Sterling is probably popping champagne right now, waiting to buy our assets at auction. I built this company from nothing. I will not let it end like this." The heavy oak doors creaked open. Julian entered. He looked pale, his skin clammy, but there was a manic energy in his eyes that Silas mistook for determination. In reality, it was the adrenaline of a man who had just committed treason to save his own neck. He was holding a thin blue folder like a shield. "I fixed it," Julian announced, his voice cracking slightly. Silas turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. "What did you say?" "I said I fixed it," Julian repeated, walking further into the room. "I made some calls. I reached out to a private equity group I know from the city. They specialize in rapid capital injection for distressed logistics companies. They are willing to step in." Silas snatched the folder from Julian's hands. "Who are they?" he demanded, flipping through the pages. "They are called Retribution Holdings." Julian lied, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. "They are a silent partner group. They want to remain anonymous until the deal is closed to prevent market speculation. But the money is real, Dad. They are offering to clear the immediate debt with Phoenix Capital and inject operating cash to end the strike." Silas scanned the document. He ignored the ominous name of the company. He ignored the aggressive terms regarding board structure. He only saw the numbers. He saw salvation. "They want a board seat," Silas noted, frowning. "And they want a significant equity position. It is standard for a bailout this size," Julian argued quickly, sweat beading on his forehead. We have no choice, Dad. It is either this or we padlock the doors tomorrow morning. Besides, I vetted them. They are just money men. They do not want to run the company, they just want a return on investment. You will still be the CEO. You will still be in charge. That was the lie that sealed the coffin. Julian knew that Retribution Holdings was not a passive investor. He knew it was a predator. But he needed his father to sign the agreement to legitimize the transfer of power. Silas looked at his family. He looked at Tiffany, terrified of losing her status. He looked at Dante, useless and weak. And he looked at Julian, the son he thought had finally stepped up. Fine. Silas exhaled, dropping into his chair with a mix of relief and exhaustion. Set up the meeting. Bring them to the boardroom tomorrow. We will sign the deal and get the trucks moving. Julian nodded, hiding his trembling hands in his pockets. He had done it. He had invited the wolf into the sheep pen, and he had convinced the shepherd to open the gate. At 8 o'clock on Tuesday morning, the official summons arrived in Silas Thorne's inbox. It was marked high priority and flagged with the red exclamation point of urgency. The subject line read, Emergency Shareholder Meeting Debt Restructuring and Capital Injection Proposal. It was sent from a prestigious law firm in Midtown representing the mysterious Retribution Holdings. Silas read the email twice, his chest expanding with a renewed sense of importance. To him, this legal document was not a summons. It was a surrender. He believed that this new investment group was rushing to the table because they saw the immense value in his company. He believed they were desperate to buy into the Thorne legacy before the stock rebounded. He looked at Werner, who was slumped on the office sofa looking like he hadn't slept in a week. Get up, Werner, Silas commanded, clapping his hands together. They took the bait. The investors want a meeting at 10 o'clock in our boardroom. They are coming to us. That means we have the upper hand. He walked over to the mirror, adjusting his tie and smoothing back his silver hair. The fear that had paralyzed him yesterday was replaced by his trademark arrogance. He convinced himself that he had orchestrated this rescue, that his business acumen had attracted the capital, conveniently forgetting that his son had to commit fraud to make the introduction. Notify the board, Silas barked. And tell Tiffany and Dante to be here. I want a show of family unity. We need to look untouchable. When these investors walk in, I want them to smell old money and stability. We are going to dictate the terms, Werner. We will take their cash, give them a minority seat, and in 5 years, we will buy them out. Werner nodded slowly, too exhausted to argue, though he sensed a trap. The speed of the transaction was unnatural. Due diligence usually took weeks, not hours. But Silas was in no mood for caution. He was a drowning man who had spotted a lifeboat, unaware that it was being steered by a pirate. Across town, inside the sleek conference room of Phoenix Capital, I watched Silas's acceptance reply hit my server. I was not wearing the gold dress from the gala, nor was I wearing the modest attire of a girlfriend. I was wearing a black bespoke suit that looked like it had been cut from the night sky. My hair was straightened sharp as a blade. Marcus stood by the door holding a thick binder labeled Thorne Logistics Hostile Takeover Protocol. He took the bait, Marcus said, checking his watch. They have cleared security for us. They are expecting a team of bankers from Retribution Holdings. I stood up, picking up my briefcase. It did not contain money. It contained the death certificate of Silas Thorne's career. Let's not keep them waiting, I said, walking toward the elevator. Silas thinks he is hosting a negotiation. He doesn't realize he is hosting his own funeral. And I want to make sure I am there to shovel the dirt. We rode the elevator down in silence. The anticipation was electric. I had waited 10 years for this moment. Every insult, every look of disdain, every time I was made to feel small, it all culminated in this drive to his office. I checked the USB drive in my pocket one last time. It was ready. The trap was set. The tiger was in the cage, and he had foolishly invited the hunter inside to lock the door. The air inside the executive boardroom was so thick with tension it felt like breathing underwater. Silas sat at the head of the long oak table, drumming his fingers nervously on the leather armrest. He had spent the last hour rehearsing his pitch, convincing himself that he was still the lion of the industry, not a wounded animal begging for scraps. To his right sat Julian, looking like he was about to vomit. To his left were Dante and Tiffany, both dressed in their finest clothes, playing the role of the supportive dynasty. Silas leaned forward, fixing his family with a stern glare. "Listen to me. When these investors walk in, you do not speak unless spoken to. We need to project strength. If they smell fear, they will try to lowball us on the valuation." Julian sit up straight. "You look like you are attending a funeral." Julian flinched, straightening his tie, but he could not stop his leg from bouncing under the table. He knew exactly whose funeral it was. At exactly 10 o'clock, the heavy double doors at the far end of the room swung open. Silas stood up immediately, putting on his best charming smile, ready to greet the savior of his company. "Gentlemen, welcome to Thorn Logistics," Silas boomed, extending his hand toward the doorway. "We are ready to—" His voice died in his throat. His hand remained frozen in mid-air. There were no gentlemen. There was no team of bankers in gray suits. There was only me. I walked into the room with a slow, deliberate stride, the heels of my black stilettos clicking rhythmically against the marble floor. I was flanked by Marcus and two other grim-faced lawyers, but all eyes were on me. I wore a tailored black power suit that cost more than Tiffany's entire wardrobe, and my hair was pulled back in a severe, commanding style. I did not look at Dante. I did not look at Tiffany. I locked eyes with Silas, whose face had gone from welcoming to purple with rage in the span of 3 seconds. "What is this joke?" Silas sputtered, looking past me as if expecting the real investors to appear. "Security. Why is this woman in my boardroom?" I gave specific orders that she was banned from the building. He turned to Werner, who was shrinking into the corner. "Call the guards, Werner. Get this street trash out of here before the investors arrive. We cannot have a scene." I reached the end of the table directly opposite Silas. I did not sit down. I placed my briefcase on the polished wood with a soft thud. "Sit down, Silas," I said, my voice calm but echoing with absolute authority. "There are no other investors coming. The meeting has already started." Silas laughed, a desperate, confused sound. You are the investor. Do not make me laugh. You cannot even afford a parking ticket. Get out before I have you arrested for trespassing." I signaled to Marcus. He stepped forward and placed a single document in front of Silas. "Read the letterhead, Silas," I commanded. "Retribution Holdings is a wholly owned subsidiary of Phoenix Capital, and I am the CEO of Phoenix Capital. I am not here to apply for a job. I am here to take yours." Silas did not just stand up, he practically vibrated with a mixture of confusion and explosive anger. He looked at me as if I were a cockroach that had somehow scurried onto a wedding cake. He did not see a threat. He saw a nuisance. He slammed his hand down on the intercom button on the conference table, holding it down with a white-knuckled grip. "Security!" Silas bellowed into the speaker, his voice cracking with rage. "I have an intruder in the executive suite. A woman. She is trespassing. Send a team up here immediately and have her removed. I want her thrown out on the sidewalk." He released the button and pointed a shaking finger at my face. "You have 5 seconds to leave on your own before I have you dragged out in handcuffs. I do not know what kind of sick game you are playing, or which one of my enemies put you up to this, but you are out of your depth. This is a billion-dollar company, not a playground for jealous ex-girlfriends." I did not move. I did not blink. I simply watched him unravel. The room was deadly silent. Julian was staring at the table, looking like he wanted to dissolve into the floor. Dante was looking at me with his mouth slightly open, trying to reconcile the image of the woman he had dated with the cold figure standing before him. Silas turned to Werner. "Why are you just standing there? Call the police. Tell them we have a mental patient in the boardroom." Werner reached for the phone, but before he could lift the receiver, Marcus stepped forward. My lawyer moved with the precision of a surgeon. He did not raise his voice. He did not shout. He simply placed a heavy leather binder on the table directly in front of Silas. The sound of it hitting the wood was louder than Silas's screaming. "I would advise against calling the authorities." "Mr. Thorne," Marcus said, his voice calm and professional, "unless you want to explain to the NYPD why you are attempting to forcibly remove the owner of this building from her own property." Silas froze. He looked at Marcus, then down at the binder, and finally back at me. "What are you talking about?" Silas spat. "I own this building. I built this building." Marcus adjusted his glasses. "Actually, you sold the mortgage on this building to a blind trust 48 hours ago to cover your payroll deficit. That trust is managed by Phoenix Capital, and the woman standing in front of you is not an intruder." Marcus gestured to me with an open hand. "Allow me to formally introduce the chairwoman and CEO of Phoenix Capital." Marcus continued, letting the title hang in the air like a guillotine blade. "Her firm currently holds 60% of Thorne Logistics' corporate debt, and as of yesterday afternoon, she also acquired a 15% equity stake in your company." Silas blinked, his brain struggling to process the information. He looked at me, scanning my face for a trace of the girl he had humiliated. "That is impossible," Silas whispered, his arrogance faltering for the first time. "Phoenix Capital is a Wall Street powerhouse. She is nobody. She drives a rusted Honda. She has no family. She is nothing." I took a step forward, leaning my hands on the back of the chair at the head of the table, his chair. "I drive a Honda because I do not waste money on depreciating assets like Maybachs and yachts," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "I save my money for better investments, like buying the debt of arrogant men who think they are untouchable." I pulled the chair out and sat down. The leather creaked as I settled into the seat of power. "Now sit down, Silas," I ordered. "We have a lot of work to do, and judging by your balance sheet, you are working for me now." Silas stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He wanted to scream. He wanted to throw me out. But the reality of my position and the debt I held over his head kept him glued to his chair. He looked at Werner, begging for an explanation, but Werner just stared at the floor. "You asked why your company is bankrupt, Silas," I said, breaking the silence. "You think it is because of fuel prices or union strikes, but you are looking in the wrong direction. You should be looking to your right." I nodded to Marcus. He tapped a key on his laptop, and the massive projection screen behind me hummed to life. A spreadsheet appeared. It was not a standard balance sheet. It was a forensic trace of the company's internal accounts over the last 18 months. Rows of red numbers scrolled down the screen, each one highlighting a massive, unauthorized withdrawal. Silas squinted at the screen. "What is this?" he muttered. "These are transfers from the Employee Pension Fund. Who authorized these?" I stood up and walked over to the screen, pointing to the recipient column. The funds were not sent to vendors. They were not sent to suppliers. They were wired to an offshore crypto exchange wallet. $50 million, Silas," I announced, my voice echoing in the room. $50 million stolen from the retirement savings of the men and women who built your company. And if you look at the authorization signature on the digital key, you will recognize the name. I tapped the screen again. The image zoomed in on a digital signature. Julian Thorne. Silas stopped breathing. The room went deadly still. He turned his head slowly, mechanically toward his eldest son. Julian was shaking so violently that his chair was vibrating against the floor. His face was a mask of sheer terror, sweat dripping from his nose onto his silk tie. "Julian," Silas whispered, his voice trembling. "Tell me this is a mistake. Tell me you did not touch the pension fund." Julian opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Tiffany for help, but she had recoiled from him, pressing herself against the wall, as if his guilt were contagious. "It was supposed to be a sure thing," Dad. Julian finally choked out the words, spilling out in a rush of panic. "The market was booming. I was going to double the money and put it back before the audit. I was doing it for the company. I wanted to surprise you." Silas stood up, his face draining of all color. "You gambled the pension fund?" he roared, his voice cracking with betrayal. "You stole from our people to buy magic internet money." Julian slid out of his chair. He did not stand up. He crumbled. He fell to his knees on the plush carpet, grabbing the hem of Silas's jacket like a child. "Please, Dad, you have to help me. They are going to put me in jail. I cannot go to prison. I am a thorn." Silas looked down at his son, the golden boy, the heir apparent now reduced to a weeping mess on the floor. The image of the strong dynasty he had tried to project was shattered. I watched them with cold detachment. "Look at him, Silas," I said. "You called me trash because I came from nothing. Yet here is your bloodline, your legacy groveling on the floor after committing grand larceny. It turns out the trash was already inside the house." Silas looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and agony. He knew I had won, but I was not done yet. I signaled Marcus to change the slide. "And Julian is not the only one who has been busy," I said, turning my gaze to Tiffany. "Let's talk about the charity, shall we?" Julian was still sobbing into the carpet, a heap of broken pride and Italian wool. Tiffany adjusted her silk scarf, looking down at her husband with undisguised disgust. She took a step toward the door, clearly intending to slip away, while Silas was distracted by his son's destruction. She thought she was merely a witness to this tragedy. She thought her crimes were limited to a fake charity and some creative accounting. She was wrong. "Sit down, Tiffany," I commanded. "The show is not over yet." Tiffany froze. She turned to me, her eyes flashing with indignation. "I am leaving. I will not stay here and watch you torture my family. My husband has clearly had a breakdown. I need to call his doctor." I picked up a thick manila envelope from my briefcase. "You can call the doctor later. Right now, we need to discuss how Thorn Logistics lost the Amazon contract last quarter, and the Walmart bid the month before that." Silas looked up from his weeping son. His eyes were red and unfocused. "We lost those bids because we were underpriced," he muttered. "It was the market." "No, Silas," I corrected him. "You lost those bids because your competitors knew your exact pricing strategy 3 days before you submitted it. They undercut you by pennies on the dollar every single time. And do you know how they got that information?" I tossed the envelope onto the polished oak table. It slid across the surface, spinning until it hit Silas's hand. He opened it slowly, his fingers trembling. He pulled out a stack of high-resolution photographs. The first photo showed Tiffany sitting in a dim booth at a hotel bar in Midtown. She was laughing, her hand resting intimately on the arm of a man in a gray suit. The second photo showed her passing a flash drive to the same man. The third photo showed them entering a hotel elevator together. Silas stared at the photo. He knew the man. Everyone in the industry knew him. "That is Arthur Vance," Silas whispered, his voice barely audible. "The vice president of Redline Logistics, our biggest rival in the tri-state area." I nodded. "Tiffany has been sleeping with him for 6 months. But that is not the interesting part. My investigators recovered deleted emails from her private server. She was not just trading affection, Silas. She was trading corporate secrets. Every time you held a strategy meeting at the house, she was listening. She sold your pricing models to Vance in exchange for cash payments to her offshore accounts. She bought that Himalayan Birkin bag with the money she made by selling out this family." Silas slowly lifted his gaze to Tiffany. The look on his face was not anger. It was a profound, hollow horror. He looked like a man who had just realized his entire life was a lie. "You gave them the Amazon bid?" Silas asked, his voice shaking. "You gave them everything." Tiffany backed away, her face pale. She looked at Julian, who was still useless on the floor, and then at Silas, who looked ready to kill. Her mask of sophistication crumbled. "I had to live," she screamed, her voice shrill and ugly. "Julian lost all our money on crypto. He cut off my allowance. I have expenses. I have a reputation to maintain. What was I supposed to do? Wait for this sinking ship to go under? Vance appreciated me. He treated me like a partner. You people treated me like a decoration." She had just admitted to corporate espionage to pay for her vanity. The room fell into a stunned silence. The Thorne dynasty was not being destroyed by market forces or hostile takeovers. It was cannibalizing itself. The father was a tyrant, the son was a thief, and the daughter-in-law was a traitor. I looked at Dante. He was sitting in the corner staring at his family as if they were strangers. He looked at me, pleading silently for me to stop, but I felt nothing for him. Silas dropped the photos. He slumped back in his chair, looking 10 years older than he had 10 minutes ago. He looked at the ceiling, letting out a long, ragged breath. "Get out," Silas whispered. "All of you. Get out of my sight." I remained seated. "They can leave, Silas," I said coldly. "But you stay. We still have the matter of your resignation to discuss." The room was filled with the debris of a shattered dynasty. Julian was still weeping on the floor, and Tiffany was clutching her chest as if she were the victim of a great injustice. Amidst the wreckage, Dante slowly stood up. He adjusted his jacket, his face pale but set with a desperate kind of resolve. He looked at his father, broken and defeated in the captain's chair, and then he looked at me with eyes pleading for mercy. "Stop it, Sienna," Dante said, his voice trembling but loud enough to cut through the silence. "You have made your point. You destroyed Julian. You humiliated Tiffany. You have proven you are powerful, but leave Dad out of this. He didn't know. He is an old man, Sienna. Do not kill him just to satisfy your grudge." He took a step toward me, reaching out a hand as if he could still charm me, as if the ghost of our relationship could save him now. "I am the only one here who is innocent." Dante continued, gaining a little confidence. "I didn't steal money. I didn't sell secrets. I just wanted to be an architect. I tried to help you remember. I sent you money. I defended you. If you have a heart left under that expensive suit, please just walk away and let us pick up the pieces." I looked at his outstretched hand. It was manicured soft and utterly useless. I let out a low, cold laugh that made him flinch. "Innocent." I repeated the word, tasting the lie on my tongue. "You think you are the moral compass of this family because you didn't pull the trigger. But you watched the gun being loaded, Dante, and you said nothing." I signaled to Marcus. He clicked the remote one final time. The screen behind me changed. It displayed a text message thread recovered from Julian's phone. The date stamp was from 6 months ago. "Read it, Dante," I commanded. "Read it out loud so your father can hear how innocent you are." Dante froze. He stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. He recognized the messages. "Fine, I will read it," I said, turning to look at Silas. "This is a text from Julian to Dante, dated November 12th. Julian writes, 'I am in deep with the crypto losses. I took $5 million from the pension fund to cover the margin call. If Dad finds out, he will disown me.'" I paused, letting the words hang in the air. Silas looked at Dante, his eyes widening. "And this," I continued, pointing to the blue bubble on the screen, "is your innocent son's reply." Dante wrote, "Do not tell Dad. If the stock price tanks before my trust fund vests next year, I lose everything. Fix it quietly, or I will kill you." I turned back to Dante. "You knew," I whispered, my voice laced with venom. "You knew your brother was stealing the retirement savings of 3,000 workers. You knew he was committing a felony. But you didn't go to the police. You didn't go to your father. You stayed silent. Not to protect Julian, not to protect the family name, but to protect your trust fund." Dante sank back into his chair, covering his face with his hands. He could not look at me. He could not look at his father. "You are not the good son, Dante," I said, my voice cold and final. "You are the worst of them all. At least Julian and Tiffany were acting out of desperation. You acted out of pure, unadulterated cowardice. You sold your own father for a payout that you didn't even earn." Silas let out a sound that was half groan, half sob. He looked at Dante with a look of absolute betrayal. The son he thought was his moral anchor was just another rat on the sinking ship. I picked up my briefcase and snapped it shut. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. "There is no one left, Silas," I said. "They are all liars. They are all thieves. And you raised them. This is your legacy. A family that would sell each other for a quick buck, and now you have sold them all to me. The silence in the boardroom was the sound of a dynasty dying. Julian was still on the floor. Dante was slumped in his chair like a rag doll, and Tiffany was staring blankly at the wall. Silas Thorne sat alone at the head of the table, a king without a kingdom, his breathing heavy and ragged. He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and confusion, his mind desperately trying to find an escape route from the trap I had sprung. "You have made your point, Sienna." Silas rasped his voice, losing its thunder. "You have humiliated my children. You have exposed our secrets. But this is still my company. I own 60% of the voting shares. You can wave your loan documents around all you want, but you are just a creditor. You cannot sit in that chair. You cannot make decisions. Now get out of my building before I call the police." I looked at Marcus. He didn't smile. He simply opened the final folder in his stack, the one labeled Execution Protocol. He slid a single crisp document across the table. It stopped inches from Silas's shaking hands. "Read the fine print on the loan agreement you signed with the bank 5 years ago." "Silas," I said softly. "Specifically the clause regarding technical default and insolvency." Silas looked down at the paper. His eyes scanned the legal jargon, his brow furrowing. "What is this?" he muttered. "It is a debt-to-equity swap provision." I explained, my voice clinical and cold. "When you failed to make the interest payment on Monday, and when your liquidity index dropped below the mandatory threshold yesterday, the lender gained the right to convert the outstanding debt into equity at the current market valuation." I stood up and walked to the whiteboard behind me. I picked up a black marker. "Phoenix Capital holds $12 million of your debt," I said, writing the number on the board. "Since your company is currently valued at next to nothing, thanks to the strike and the scandal, that debt converts into 36% of the total equity." Silas laughed a dry, desperate sound. 36%. That is a minority stake. I still hold the majority. You are a minority shareholder, Sienna. You cannot oust me. I uncapped the marker again. "You are forgetting one thing, Silas," I said, turning to look at Julian. "Yesterday your son transferred his personal holding of 15% to Retribution Holdings to prevent me from sending his confession to the FBI. I wrote the number 15 under the 36. I drew a line and added them up. 36 plus 15 equals 51, I said, circling the final number. The marker squeaked against the board, a harsh sound in the quiet room. Retribution Holdings is me. Phoenix Capital is me. Which means as of this moment, I control 51% of the voting stock of Thorne Logistics. I dropped the marker. It clattered onto the floor. "I am not a creditor, Silas. I am not a minority shareholder. I am the owner. I am the board. And I am the decision maker. Your 60% has been diluted down to a meaningless minority stake. You are no longer the CEO of this company. You are just a disgruntled employee sitting in my chair." Silas stared at the whiteboard, the numbers burning into his retinas. The math was irrefutable. The trap was perfect. He had been outmaneuvered not by force, but by the very greed and incompetence he had fostered in his own children. He looked at me, his face crumbling as the reality finally took hold. He had lost everything, and he had lost it to the girl he thought wasn't worth the wine she drank. Marcus placed a pen on the document. "Sign the acknowledgement, Silas," I ordered. "Or I will have security escort you out of the building as a trespasser. The choice is yours." The silence in the room was shattered by the scratch of my pen against the paper. It was a sharp, definitive sound, like a judge banging a gavel. Silas was gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles white, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. He watched my hand move, his eyes widening, as he realized exactly what I was signing. I finished the signature with a flourish and slid the document down the long oak table. It came to rest directly in front of him, right on top of the photos of Tiffany's betrayal. Effective immediately, I announced, my voice echoing off the cold marble walls. You are relieved of your duties as Chief Executive Officer of Thorn Logistics. The board has voted to remove you for cause, specifically gross fiduciary negligence, failure to maintain corporate solvency, and conspiracy to conceal the felonious embezzlement committed by your son. Silas stared at the paper. The words seemed to swim before his eyes. Terminated, relieved of duties. These were words he used on other people. They were not words that applied to him. He was Silas Thorn. He was the company. You cannot do this. Silas rasped his voice, sounding thick and strange. I am the founder. You are nothing. He tried to stand up. He pushed his heavy frame up from the chair, his face flushing a deep, alarming shade of purple. He raised a shaking hand to point at me, his mouth opening to unleash a torrent of rage. Get out! He tried to scream, but the words did not come out. Instead, a garbled, wet sound escaped his throat. His eyes bulged. Suddenly, the left side of his face went slack, drooping, as if the muscles had been cut. His arm fell uselessly to his side, striking the table with a dull thud. Dad Dante screamed, jumping up from his chair. Silas swayed for a second, looking at me with one good eye filled with pure, unadulterated terror. Then his legs gave out. He collapsed forward, his heavy body crashing onto the table before sliding down to the floor. The sound was sickening, a heavy dead weight hitting the carpet. Chaos erupted. Dante and Julian scrambled over each other to get to him. Tiffany screamed, backing away into the corner, horrified not by his suffering, but by the ugliness of it. Call 911, Dante shouted, loosening his father's tie. He is not breathing right. Do something. I did not move. I remained seated in the CEO's chair, watching the scene with clinical detachment. I saw Silas gasping for air, his hand clawing weakly at the carpet. I saw the panic in his children's eyes. This was the man who had terrified them their entire lives, the titan who ruled with an iron fist, now reduced to a trembling heap by a blood clot and his own ego. Marcus looked at me for instruction. Call the paramedics, I said calmly, and tell security to clear the freight elevator. I do not want a stretcher blocking the main lobby during the client lunch hour. I stood up and walked over to where Silas lay. I looked down at him. His eyes met mine one last time before rolling back. There was no triumph in my heart, only a cold sense of completion. He had spent his life crushing others. It was only fitting that the weight of his own failures finally crushed him. Get him out of my office, I told Dante, who was sobbing over his father's chest. And take your brother and sister with you. You are all trespassing. I turned my back on them and walked to the window, looking out at the city that now belonged to me, while behind me the sirens began to wail. The paramedics arrived within 4 minutes, a whirlwind of high-visibility vests and medical equipment. They loaded Silas onto a gurney, strapping him down as he groaned, his face still slack and twisted from the stroke. He was conscious barely, his eyes darting around the room in a panic, realizing he was being carried out of his own kingdom, not as a conqueror, but as a casualty. I stood by the window, my back to them. I did not need to see it. I had seen enough. Julian hovered by the door, looking lost. He started to follow the paramedics, but a large hand clamped down on his shoulder. It was Frank, the head of building security. I remembered Frank. 2 years ago, I had witnessed Silas scream at him in the lobby for 10 minutes because the elevator was too slow. Silas had called him incompetent and threatened to fire him on Christmas Eve. Frank had taken it with his head bowed, humiliated in front of the entire staff. Today, Frank was not bowing. I am going with my father, Julian snapped, trying to shrug off the hand. Frank did not let go. His grip tightened, bunching the fabric of Julian's expensive suit. The paramedics have it handled, Mr. Thorne, Frank said, his voice deep and rumbling. My orders are to escort all non-personnel from the building immediately. That includes you. Julian's jaw dropped. Do you know who I am? I am Julian Thorne. I sign your paychecks. Frank looked at me. I turned slowly from the window and met his gaze. I gave him a single, barely perceptible nod. Not anymore. Frank said, a small, grim smile touching his lips. You are trespassing on private property, and the new owner has a zero-tolerance policy for unauthorized visitors. Frank signaled to two other guards. They stepped forward, flanking Julian and Dante. Hand over your badges, Frank ordered. And your phones. They are company property. Julian hesitated, clutching his phone like a lifeline. One of the guards simply ripped it out of his hand. Another guard stepped up to Dante, who surrendered his badge without a fight, his eyes wet with tears. This way, Frank said, pointing a thumb toward the freight elevator. They did not get to take the executive lift. They were marched down the hallway past the glass walls of the conference rooms where the staff had gathered to watch. Hundreds of employees, people who had been underpaid and undervalued for years, pressed their faces against the glass. They watched as the Thorne dynasty was paraded past them. There was no pity in their eyes. There was only the cold, hard satisfaction of justice. Silas was wheeled out first, a broken king on a stretcher. Then came Julian, stumbling and red-faced, shoved along by the very guards he had ignored for years. Dante followed, head hanging low. I followed them as far as the elevator banks. As the heavy steel doors of the service elevator opened, revealing the scuffed interior used for trash and deliveries, Julian turned back to look at me. You cannot do this, he screamed, his voice echoing down the corridor. We built this place. I stood with my arms crossed, flanked by Marcus and my legal team. You didn't build it, Julian, I said, my voice carrying over the murmurs of the staff. You stole from it, you bled it dry, and now you are being evicted from it. Frank shoved Julian into the elevator. Silas let out a low moan from the stretcher. Dante stepped in, shrinking into the corner. Frank looked at me one last time, touched the brim of his cap in a salute of genuine respect, and hit the button for the ground floor. The door slid shut, cutting off the sight of the Thorne family forever. The light above the elevator signaled the descent. Going down. I turned back to the silent office. The employees were still watching me, uncertain, waiting to see if the new boss was just a different version of the old tyrant. Get back to work, I said, not unkindly. We have a company to save, and everyone gets their paycheck today. A ripple of relief went through the crowd. I walked back into my boardroom alone at last. The air tasted cleaner. The infection had been removed. Now the real work could begin. The private suite at Mount Sinai Hospital was quiet. It was the kind of expensive, suffocating silence that money could buy, but could not fill. Silas Thorne lay in the bed, the left side of his face sagging like melted wax, his body hooked up to a rhythmic beeping monitor that served as the only conversation he had had in 24 hours. He stared at the door. He was waiting. In his mind, distorted by the stroke and the medication, he expected a parade of visitors. He expected Tiffany to rush in with flowers, weeping over his condition. He expected Dante to be sitting by the bedside holding his hand. He even expected Julian to be there apologizing and fixing things. But the chair beside the bed was empty. Tiffany was likely already on a plane to Monaco, scouting for a new husband, now that the Thorne well had run dry. Julian was currently being processed at the central booking station, trading his silk suit for a gray uniform. And Dante? Dante was somewhere in the city, hiding in a hotel room, too terrified to face the father he had disappointed or the woman he had scorned. Silas was alone. He had spent 40 years building a dynasty, and in his moment of greatest need, not a single soul had shown up. Then the door opened. Silas's eyes lit up for a fraction of a second, but the hope died instantly. It was not family. It was me. I walked into the room holding a simple manila envelope. I did not bring flowers. I did not bring grapes. I brought the final nail for his coffin. I stood at the foot of the bed, looking down at the man who had once terrified me. He looked small now, withered. Hello, Silas, I said, my voice soft but devoid of warmth. I heard the doctors say you will make a partial recovery. You will be able to walk again, talk again. Silas tried to speak. His lips moved, but only a guttural wet sound came out. His good hand clawed at the bedsheet, his eyes burning with an impotent rage. "Save your strength," I advised. "You are going to need it." I stepped closer and placed the envelope on the bedside table, right next to his untouched cup of water. "I came to bring you your mail," I said. "This arrived at the estate this morning. It is a foreclosure notice from the bank. It seems that in your desperation to pay the fleet insurance last month, you used the mansion as collateral. And since the company accounts are frozen and your personal assets are seized, the bank called the loan." Silas stopped clawing the sheets. He stared at the envelope. His home. The sprawling estate in the Hamptons. The symbol of his status. "Don't worry." I continued, a small, cold smile playing on my lips. "I didn't let it go to a stranger. I bought it. The bank was eager to unload a distressed property, and since I am now the primary creditor, I picked it up for a fraction of its value." I leaned in my face inches from his. "I own your company, I own your debt, and now I own your house. When they discharge you from this hospital, Silas, you do not have a home to go back to. I will give you 24 hours to have your personal effects removed. Anything left behind will be donated to charity." Silas's monitor began to beep faster. His heart rate was spiking. He looked at me with a look of pure devastation. He realized then that I had not just beaten him, I had erased him. I patted his hand, the gesture mocking in its gentleness. "Rest up, Silas. You have a long, hard life ahead of you." I turned and walked out of the room, leaving him alone with the rhythmic beeping of the machine and the crushing weight of his own solitude. The sound of the drill was the only thing audible in the massive atrium of the headquarters. It whined and ground against the marble, a harsh mechanical noise that signaled the end of an era. I stood in the center of the lobby, my arms crossed, watching as the workmen pried the heavy brass letters of Thorn Logistics off the wall. One by one, the letters came loose, the T, the H, the O, crashing onto the drop cloth below with a heavy metallic thud. It was not vandalism, it was an exorcism. The balconies above me were lined with employees, hundreds of them. They watched in silence, their faces pale with uncertainty. They had survived the strike, they had survived the bankruptcy scare, but they did not know if they would survive me. To them, I was still the unknown variable, the woman who had decapitated the leadership in a single afternoon. They expected a purge. They expected me to finish what Silas had started and fire everyone to cut costs. I turned to face them. The drill stopped. The silence was absolute. "I know what you are thinking," I said, my voice projecting clearly without a microphone. "You are waiting for the axe to fall. You are used to a leadership style that treats people like disposable parts. You are used to being fired because the CEO had a bad day or because the stock dropped 1/4 of a point." I walked over to the reception desk where a young woman was trembling, clutching her phone. I smiled at her, a genuine warm expression that surprised her. "That ends today," I announced, looking back up at the mezzanine. "There will be no mass layoffs. The only people leaving this building are the ones who helped Silas Thorne break the law. The rest of you are the muscle and bone of this company. You are the ones who kept the lights on while the executive suite was busy stealing the copper wiring." A murmur went through the crowd. Shoulders dropped. Breath was exhaled. I motioned to Marcus, who was standing by a stack of boxes. He opened the first one. "We are going to rebuild," I continued. "But we cannot do it alone. We need the people who actually know how this company works." Silas fired the best talent because they threatened his ego. He fired Mrs. Higgins in accounting because she caught a math error. He fired the safety inspectors because they wouldn't sign off on broken trucks. Marcus began handing out letters to the department heads. "These are rehiring offers," I said. "Contact every single person Silas wrongfully terminated in the last 5 years. Offer them their jobs back with a 10% raise and full reinstatement of benefits. Tell them the tyrant is gone. Tell them it is safe to come home." The reaction was immediate. Someone on the second floor started clapping, then another. Within seconds, the lobby was filled with applause. It wasn't polite applause. It was the sound of relief, of vindication. I walked out through the front doors as the workmen hoisted the new sign into place. It was sleek, modern, and sharp. The silver letters caught the afternoon sun, shining like a beacon. Phoenix Logistics. I looked at it feeling a swell of pride that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with creation. I had burned Silas's world to the ground, yes. But I had not done it just to watch the fire. I had done it so I could build something better from the ashes. The Thorn legacy was dead. My legacy was just beginning. The champagne in my glass was a 1999 vintage, the same year Silas Thorne started his first offshore shell company. It tasted like justice. I stood on the balcony of the penthouse office, the wind whipping through my hair, looking down at the city I had just conquered. The lights of Manhattan sprawled out before me, a grid of electricity and ambition, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was holding the switch. Inside the office, the silence was absolute. The frantic energy of the takeover had dissipated. The lawyers had gone home. The security team had finished their sweep. It was just me and the ghost of the man who used to sit in this chair. I walked back to the massive oak desk and ran my hand over the leather surface. I had won. I had stripped the Thorne family of their assets, their reputation, and their future. I had rebuilt the company in my own image. It was the perfect victory, or so I thought. A low, vibrating hum broke the silence. I frowned, checking my phone on the desk. It was dark. The sound came again, a dull, persistent buzzing. It was coming from inside the desk itself. I knelt, feeling under the heavy wood of the drawer until my fingers brushed against a latch. A false bottom. I pressed it, and a small, concealed compartment popped open. Inside lay a single nondescript burner phone. It was old, scuffed, and vibrating violently against the wood. I stared at it. This was not a corporate line. This was something else. Something Silas had kept hidden from everyone, even his family. Even me. I picked it up. The screen displayed no number, just the words "incoming call." My instinct told me to crush it, to throw it off the balcony and let the secrets die with Silas. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. I pressed the green button and held the device to my ear. I did not speak. I waited. There was no static. The line was crystal clear. "Congratulations are in order, Ms. Sienna," a voice said. It was a male voice, deep-accented and utterly terrified of nothing. It was not the voice of a banker or a lawyer. It was the voice of a man who solved problems with a bone saw. "You have done a remarkable job cleaning house," the voice continued, smooth as oil. "You got rid of the old man. You neutralized the sun. You even managed to charm the labor unions. Very impressive. You swallowed the shark whole." "Who is this?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. "That is not important," he replied. "What is important is what you missed. You see, when you acquired the assets of Thorne Logistics, you acquired all the assets, including the ones that are not on the manifest." I felt a cold prickle of unease run down my spine. "I audited every container," I said, my voice steady. "The inventory is clean." The man laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "You audited what Silas wanted you to see, but you didn't check the subfloor of container number 4 currently sitting in dry dock at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. It was scheduled for transport 3 days ago, but your little hostile takeover froze the fleet." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "Silas was moving more than just auto parts and electronics, Ms. Sienna. That container is full of very sensitive, very expensive hardware that belongs to my employers. We do not care about your corporate wars. We do not care about your stock price. We only care about our delivery." The city lights outside suddenly didn't look like jewels anymore. They looked like watching eyes. "You are the owner now," the voice said, dropping all pretense of politeness. "Which means you are the one responsible for the delay. You have 24 hours to get that truck moving, or we will come and collect the debt from you personally. And unlike the banks, we do not accept equity swaps." The line clicked dead. I slowly lowered the phone. The champagne glass on the desk caught the light golden and bubbling. A minute ago, I thought I had reached the summit. I thought the war was over. I looked at the black screen of the burner phone, realizing with a sinking heart that I hadn't won the war. I had just walked onto a new, much bloodier battlefield. I turned to look at the door, half expecting to see shadows moving in the hallway. The game had changed. And this time, the stakes were not money. They were survival. The most profound lesson from the fall of the Thorn dynasty is that arrogance is the architect of its own destruction. Silas and his family believed their power was an inherent right tied to their name and wealth, rather than their competence. They committed the fatal error of underestimating Sienna based on her background and appearance, failing to realize that true power is often quiet, strategic, and underestimated. Sienna proves that knowledge and patience are sharper weapons than bluster and intimidation. She didn't just outfight them, she outthought them. Furthermore, the story illustrates that a legacy built on corruption is destined to collapse. The Thorns were not destroyed solely by an outside force. They were destroyed by their own internal rot, Julian's theft, Tiffany's greed, and Dante's cowardice. Sienna simply exposed the cracks that were already there. However, the chilling ending serves as a final crucial reminder: ambition always has a price. Ascending to the throne means inheriting the kingdom's enemies. Success is not a destination of peace, but often a gateway to more dangerous battlefields. Sienna conquered the boardroom, but can she survive the underworld? Subscribe now and hit the notification bell to see how she handles the mafia in Season 2.